Okay, so I don't know what happened, but the video that I recorded a few days ago seems not to have recorded anything. So here is week 12. Let's see. It's important to note that self-regulation refers to self-generated thoughts, feelings, and actions that individuals use to help themselves attain personal goals. I thought this was particularly important on page 752 of the second reading. The Helsel and Greenberg Helping Struggling Writers Succeed, a Self-Regulated Strategy Instruction Program, because self-regulation is very important for when the teacher gets too busy, especially in high school. We model and then we set the kids off to do what they're supposed to be doing, and we expect that they're actually going to work without a lot of teacher intervention. So I felt like this was very important. For some students, unfortunately though, I feel like they lack the motivation. For others, it's anxiety over not fully understanding the requirements of an assignment. For others, it's not cool to be good at school and they will not do the work no matter what. I personally met quite a few of these students when I taught in Buffalo last year. The authors list the strategies, which is great, but there are many places along this line that can trip students up and cause them to abandon the process altogether. Why? Because they are all self-directed and self-motivated. When kids aren't interested in the reading, writing, or the assignment itself at all, then they aren't going to follow through on these strategies. This article was written in 2007. I'd be interested to see a study on whether or not today's students can perform these self-regulated tasks. I know that our last reading was an actual study, but it was a study about kids in a low SES versus kids in a high SES, and whether or not this SRSD strategy would work in those arenas. So I feel like I would rather see a study that talked about, okay, in 2023, post-COVID and post, all the problems we had with learning at home, does SRSD work with high school kids? Or I guess even at this point, middle school kids. I feel like many of the students who need help with these strategies are exactly the ones who are considered poor writers. I know that I've heard teachers in my building constantly complaining about how the students simply refuse to do any work at all. And I work in an affluent suburban school district. So I'd be interested to see, where those kids fall on the spectrum. So I mentioned about the poor writers. They are considered poor writers because they just refuse to write. Assuming that we are teaching to everyone about these techniques, the importance is in the modeling of the skill and giving students ample time to practice the skill on their own. We do this in high school with things like annotating. We model what to annotate, for and how, and then teachers ask the students to record and turn in their annotations. The teachers I've watched do, sometimes daily, annotation checks to make sure students are still performing them properly. When I subbed for an E&L teacher last year, I noticed some of the 5th and 6th graders students not using fix-up strategies to ensure their annotations were correct. In other words, they were just copying down a sentence or highlighting a sentence and leaving it at that. They wait for the teacher to provide feedback instead of diagnosing the issues themselves. What was most salient for me in this particular article were the stages. And I wrote them down: the collaboration through building background knowledge, modeling, discussing of explicit strategies, modeling by the teacher, and adjusting based on student need, memorizing and applying the skills, and then teacher support, and then the kids work independently on their own in the 6th stage. I thought in the video that was posted by the teacher about the genres, that for each different separate genre, we go through basically all of these 6 steps for each one of the different strategies. And that works really well on going through especially the different genres. I don't know of any teacher that just kind of goes into a brand new genre and just says, okay, here you go. Here is the work and I expect you to do it. I think today's teachers are much better at modeling and providing all the scaffolding before they let loose the kids on performing whatever task it is they're asking. I just worry, especially in the article, that like the author said, is that it takes an awful lot of time to pull each student aside to go through everything that they've done and make sure that they're, doing the right thing. So time is always of an essence, especially in high school when you only get 42 minutes per period. In the writer's checklist, procedural support for struggling writers, I like the idea of checklists. I know that they kind of follow along the same line as rubrics, which sort of do the same thing, but unlike a rubric, this piece suggests the checklist will help students begin a task, and that's really difficult because they can sit there and, yeah, that's great, I've got this rubric, but I don't know where to begin. And the checklist can help them get through the task and then self-regulate to actually finish it. Unfortunately, I have noticed many high school students not filling out rubrics, or not rubrics, but checklists, they're graphic organizers, given to them by the teachers because they just don't want to put in the extra work. I guess I'm just stuck on the idea this week of kids lacking motivation. I wonder why. I think the checklist on page 105 is a good example of some of the questions that will help guide students to make sure they've included all the necessary things, or to at least get them going. The point of helping someone to write who struggles with it is the specific guidance. We shouldn't just be providing feedback without the specific guidance on what they can do. The how to begin portion gets them writing. What do you know about the topic? Just jot down everything you know. It may or may not help you write the piece, but it gets the juices flowing, and that's very difficult for some students. The planning part is crucial for students because it sets the purpose and gets them thinking about how to craft their writing. There are questions you have to answer before you write. Most importantly is, who is your audience? I think we don't spend enough time on this part, and kids just think that they're writing for the teacher instead of their peers, and I like the idea of having the students write for their peers instead. The mind mapping is helpful in keeping all of the information easily accessible. Too often I've seen students using their notebooks to keep information, but it's not organized properly. Graphic organizers are used constantly in the classes that I see. I like the drafting, revising, and editing checklists too. They contain valuable prompts. This would be great if we had things like this for college too, especially for very long pieces. I had to write a paper last semester that needed to include 25 sources. It's challenging to keep everything straight and organized, and it felt like a puzzle for which I didn't have the picture to reference when trying to put it all together into cohesive paper. If a talented writer like me can struggle, then it makes sense that people who dislike writing or have trouble understanding how to make it all work struggle even harder. In the last reading, the effectiveness of an SRSD writing intervention on the low SES, high SES kids, it was an interesting study. I kind of expected to hear that it would have been more beneficial for the low SES kids, considering, that they struggle and don't have a lot of access to books and things like that. I did appreciate that in the article they said that this was particularly beneficial for students with learning and language disorders and the disadvantaged students on page 3. I've read multiple studies about how low SES kids are at lower levels academically than their more affluent peers, and this affects kids across all content areas, not just English. The study they conducted using different schools is interesting, and their hypothesis that these interventions would be more beneficial in low SES schools was also what I expected. We know that low SES kids have less access to print materials, especially in the early years. Because these students have less exposure, it can have one of two effects. They struggle because they lack the background of dealing with diverse texts, or they benefit because they don't have learned habits that their higher SES counterparts may have developed incorrectly. The intervention did not improve student spelling, which, based on the readings, I didn't think was a goal of the SRSD. Unsurprisingly, to me anyway, the 4th grade students' reading comprehension skills activated and actually showed some improvement on pages 23 to 24. The authors think that this is because higher SES kids get more exposure to language and that their low SES counterparts need more exposure. The point of the study is to show that the approach works regardless of SES, that it needs to be implemented early, but that huge benefits were not recorded. It's good that they did the study to show its efficacy. When these ideas are backed by research, it's easier to consider implementing them in a classroom.